Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm here at South Bend, Indiana with Dr. E. Michael Jones. So happy to do another interview, and I appreciate his team and Mike as well. Dr. Jones, how are you doing?
Good.
Love it. Tell us about your new book. You're working on this book on American identity. What kind of literary terrain are you exploring? What kind of themes are you exploring? How's it coming along?
Good. Coming along well. Basically, what's coming out now is, I think I understand the basic dynamic of American history. And the basic dynamic of American history is East-West. It's not North-South. North-South is the Civil War narrative. That's the racial narrative. That's not the hidden grammar here. The hidden grammar is East-West, and it's Catholic-Protestant. And that's what I'm starting to understand now. So you have basically the Puritans who come here with an absolutely inhuman, alien ideology. It's known as Calvinism. It is the antithesis of everything that Christianity promotes. It's a kind of Islamic view of predestination and so on and so forth. And these people, unlike the people in Europe, have wilderness. That's it. And they've got to survive the winter, and so they've got to accommodate their religion to their environment, because this religion will not survive. And so what we have here is the East-West dynamic also corresponds to the metaphysical dynamic of existence and essence. Essence is Calvinism, which they brought over from England. Existence is the woods. How are the woods and Calvinism going to interact? And the answer is you have to drop your Calvinism. Or the other ideology that came over was called Quakerism, which is the opposite of Calvinism because it's a pacifist religion. And so the classic example would be the Daniel Boone, who was raised a Quaker, and then he wanted to head west. As soon as he heads west, he's got to drop the Quakerism, he picks up a gun. And that becomes the American archetype of heading west. Okay? The other archetype is heading east. And this is the other end of the intellectual spectrum. These are the elites, the intellectuals. And whenever they reach a position of prominence, they all head to Europe. They all go to Europe. And in Europe, the first thing they're confronted with is Catholicism, largely through beauty. The beauty is a transcendental. It brings you into the presence of God. And so the archetypal Eastern moment is the literary man shows up at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Every major writer did exactly this. James Fenimore Cooper is the man who took the Daniel Boone legend, which was started in 1776. His daughter got kidnapped by the Indians in July of 1776, right after the Declaration of Independence. He organizes a party, and they go and rescue his daughter from the Indians. He becomes the hero of America, a man who unites America in that one story. Okay, this is the man of the West. He's the up-and-coming guy. 50 years later, James Fenimore Cooper takes this story and makes it the centerpiece of the plot of The Last of the Mohicans. And now takes an actual historical figure, Daniel Boone, and turns him into a mythic archetypal figure, namely Natty Bumppo. And Natty Bumppo becomes the archetypal man of the West. And the main symbol of the man of the West is the gun. And you have debates Cooper is a completely underestimated American literary figure. Completely underestimated. Everybody read Cooper. He was a huge figure. In Europe, everybody's reading Cooper. In America, everybody's reading Cooper. And he created basically the American myth. And so Natty Bumppo is a sophisticated character. The first novel is the Pioneers, where Natty Bumppo is an old man. He's older than the country, and he's put on trial, and the whole novel is about, well, what's the basis of American culture? What are you basing it on? What's your law based on? Is it based on nature? Well, then why are you arresting me for shooting a mountain lion? Okay? This is the archetypal man. And so even the man who created the archetype, James Fenimore Cooper, he goes to Europe. He spent 16 years of his life in Europe. He goes to Europe. Well, where do you go invariably, where do you end up when you go to Europe? You end up at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And you walk in, and James Fenimore Cooper, I don't think had a religious bone in his body. He was raised a Quaker like Daniel Boone. This is ridiculous. He burst into tears because he's overwhelmed by the beauty. It's a magnificent structure. There's nothing like this anywhere in America. And he's overwhelmed by the beauty. And once you're in the presence of beauty, you're in the presence of truth. And when you're in the presence of truth, you're confronted with the issue of, is Catholicism true? Now, this is the dynamic that is happening here in America, and I've been developing it from there. But I think that's the fundamental paradigm here. It's existence versus essence. It's East versus West. It's Calvinism versus Catholicism. These are the fundamental parameters that created the American identity.
I've read your work when you wrote about this sort of themes, and one thing comes to mind is I picture it, because I'm familiar with Daniel Boone. When I was a kid, I've heard the name, the hat, right? I also think of figures like Paul Bunyan, right? This lumberjack fellow, and he's chopping down trees and whatnot. But I think about that. It's this sort of geist of some sort of religion, but out of sheer necessity, you had to pick up the rifle to protect your family, and Lord knows what else is out there, the wilderness.
Right.
And it's intriguing to me.
So existence is a fundamental Thomistic principle. Existence calls essence into being. That is a fundamental revolution in European thought, because before that, everyone was a Platonist. And Platonism means you impose essence on existence because essence is eternal and existence is completely meaningless. The difference is that Aquinas understood that the world was created, that God created the world, and neither Plato nor Aristotle knew that. If God created the world, there's a logos to the universe, and all you have to do is meditate on the universe, and the logos will emerge. That's science. That's Albertus Magnus, Aquinas' teacher. That's art. That's Giotto in changing the way the Italians viewed the world. And that's America. It all fits into this paradigm. So the good news is you can go into the woods and you'll discover the logos of God in the woods because it's nature, because God created nature. But there are conditions. And Thoreau is the main man who did this. Went off into the woods at Walden Pond, contemplated nature, and you can learn this. There's one condition. You have to be chaste. Wait a minute. You mean Henry David Thoreau talked about chastity? Of course he did. It's in Walden. And this was the residual culture of the American Renaissance. Emerson was a devil worshiper. Hawthorne knew that. Brownson knew that. Anybody who reads Self-Reliance knows that. But he was a family man. He didn't divorce his wife. They had this residual moral culture combined with intellectual Satanism. And Thoreau had both of those, and when he went to the woods, he said, you have to be chaste. Well, he's absolutely right, because lust darkens the mind. If you take your lustful thoughts into nature, you're not going to learn the lesson. And that becomes the problem here. Okay? Existence brings essence into being. If your mind is clouded, you're going to project your dark desires onto nature, and nature will become an alien place. And this is the genius of Hawthorne, young Goodman Brown, also Scarlet Letter. This is so that the fundamental premise of the Scarlet Letter is the minister who commits adultery. That's a great premise because that's exactly what was happening here. Okay, and so he gets together with Hester in the woods, and Hester says, let's just head west. We don't need this shit. We don't have to put up with these people. We can head west. And Hawthorne's genius enough to understand, no, if you take your sin is inside of you. You can go as far west as you want, but you're still taking the sin with you, and it's not going to work. Hawthorne was a genius, absolute genius.
Dr. Jones, when I listen to that, it's brilliant, and there's so much reason in there. But one thing I do find is, and I see this very common with so many people, I think it was Augustine, where he points out that it's great folly to worship the creation over the creator. So what you have are people, modern people, that they go to the woods and they say that the woods is their spiritual place. Right. That the ocean, right, the magnificence of the ocean is some sort of a being that's sort of God. And so because people reject the idea of God because they're caught up with ideas of feminism or Lord knows what other kind of propaganda, and so they worship the places of beauty, the places that are so just pouring with nature, so they worship that. And I wish there was a way to just reconfigure that.
Yeah, well, there is. It's called Catholicism. But that was not the option. So Thoreau says exactly this. So he says there's a logos in nature. He's absolutely right. You can learn lessons. You can call it science, you can call it art, whatever you want to call it, you can learn lessons from nature. But then he says, every morning in spring brings about the forgiveness of sin. Oh, no, wait a minute. You're going too far. Wait a minute. How did you find out that there was something called forgiveness of sin? Which tree told you that? No, that's from Christianity. No, it's not Christianity. It's Catholicism. Specifically, the sacrament of confession. That's the only reason you know that. It's in the scriptures, whose sins you shall forgive, they are forgiven. Whose sins you shall. This is the commission to Peter. It's only through the church that this is possible, and you rejected the church. So there's no forgiveness of sin anymore, and you can't derive it from nature.
Dr. Jones, I want to know this as a Catholic, because so many of my friends who are in between lukewarm Christian, and some of them are more dedicated. I get it, we're all on our journey, but so many of my friends, they get tied up in like, I don't need to go to church or to talk to a priest to go for confession. I can just go to my closet and have a conversation with God. Is this the right way? Which is the way?
Sure, you can forgive yourself of sins. No, you can't. Where did you get that idea? Who said you could forgive your own sins? No one in his right mind understands it. Psychoanalysis is based on the fact that you have to tell someone else what you did, and then the Jew who's your psychoanalyst will say, okay, go and sin some more and pay me money. It's a perversion of the sacrament of confession. It says, this is the commission to Peter. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Whose sins you shall forgive, they are forgiven. Whose sins you shall retain. The only idea, the only possibility that there is forgiveness of sin comes from revelation, and it comes from the Catholic Church as the instrument of God's grace in this world. So what do Calvinists do? They say everything is dependent on grace, sola gratia, and then they deprive you of the source of grace by breaking your connection with the Catholic Church. So the result is Americans go crazy. Salem witch trial, Great Awakening, 1, 2, 3, Promise Keepers, charismatic movement. They go crazy after a while. And they can't, because they can't bear the guilt.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Dr. Jones, in switching gears a little bit, I see a lot of rhetoric that has to do with racial narratives and racial ideology. And as a person of the faith, I zoom out and I look past and I see, this is one way I see potential con artists, grifters, if you will. If there's so much of a preoccupation with white race and black race and brown race, and yet these same people say that they follow the faith, and I think to myself, wait a minute, the faith is not an accessory. The faith, the kingdom of God, should come first over racial ideology, but it seems like there's just so much, they don't want to let it go still. They still don't want to let it go. So how do we help people get away from just their skin color and being so prideful and their ancestors and the history of the nation? I get it. And that's a lot of great things there and a rich history, and that's wonderful. But it is so critical error to put racial ideology in front of the faith. How do we mediate this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the big immigrant group right now is the Mexicans. Okay, the Mexicans are the cosmic race. That's Vasconcelos said that. Why are they the cosmic race? Because there was a union of the indigenous, the Indians, and the Spanish. And they come together under the blessing of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and they become the cosmic race. Okay, so there seems to be a divine plan about bringing these groups together. That's Spanish Catholic culture. What happened in America? Okay, you have the Virginia colony where you got two kinds of slaves. You got white slaves and you got black slaves. The white slaves are from Scotland. They're the Highlanders who rebelled. They're the Irish. And then you got the black slaves from Africa. Well, this is the first time that black and white becomes a significant event. This is the first time the word white gets applied to European settlers. And it's because of Virginia. So it's an artificial construct, okay? I'm not denying that there are people from Europe look different than people from Africa. This is the fundamental problem. You got people who can't think abstractly. They think, well, man, my nose is different than his nose, so therefore IQ and blah, blah, blah. No. That's the problem here. Okay, now, to get to absolutely current issue right now, we're talking about Nick Fuentes and Jared Taylor. So on the one hand, you got a young guy, Nick Fuentes, who is trying to come to some understanding. He kind of symbolizes this generation, the Groyper generation that follow him on the internet. They're loyal followers. And they're confused because they can't understand, well, am I white or am I Catholic? Can I be both? Can't you be a white Catholic? No, you cannot be a white Catholic. It's like saying you're an atheist Catholic because that is a pseudo-religion. That is the religion of race in this country. You can be an Irish Catholic or a German Catholic or a Mexican Catholic because those are real ethnic identities that are strengthened by the religion. And Europe is proof of that works. But you can't be a white Catholic. And this is the confusion that Nick got involved in with this conference in Detroit. They're supposed to have the conference in Detroit. So we were kind of involved. The announcement goes out, and lo and behold, it's Jared Taylor. Why are you saying, Nick? Why are you saying Christ the King, and then inviting Jared Taylor? This makes no sense. I'm your friend, Nick. I'm your friend. I'm not like this other guy who called you a rat. I'm your friend. I'm trying to help you here, and I'm saying so. We're involved in this thing. Mike is calling his guy. You can't talk to Nick. He's like the czar. You can't get through to him. So he's talking to one of the guys there and saying, well, look, if you want to invite Jared Taylor, you should at least invite E. Michael Jones. I mean, you don't have to do anything. It's your operation. Go ahead, do it, whatever. But because you're talking out both sides of your mouth. And I'm going to give Nick the benefit of the doubt and say he's young, he's confused. Or maybe his handlers are trying to move him and finesse this in a way. Like, I don't want to lose that audience. I got a lot of white boys in my audience. But it's a mixed metaphor. It doesn't work. And the problem was, it didn't work. Because Jared Taylor knows what he's doing, okay? He's not a 25-year-old guy. He's been in this business a long time. The American Renaissance basically has one purpose, and it's to turn into white people. Now, why do you want to do that? Because as soon as it becomes white, he becomes invisible. He becomes one of us. This is one of us. Well, no, that's absolutely crazy. If you're a Catholic, is the person, these are the people who killed Christ, and they are enemies of the entire human race. Well, that fits into the current paradigm, doesn't it? Look at what Gaza did. It convinced the entire world that these are enemies of the entire human race. So Nick decides, okay, no, we're not going to invite E. Michael Jones. We're going to invite Jared Taylor. Jared Taylor, first of all, it blows up. The whole thing fails because they got their venue canceled. And the one venue that did get is the after party. Jared Taylor shows up and he starts shouting, America's a white nation. And the black guy who's the sound man turned off his mic. So it was a disaster across the board because Nick couldn't make up his mind.
Doc, I that kind of language is just, this is where it gets really frustrating because it's like, wait a minute, this is not just a white people problem. This is a problem for all of us, all right? Black people, Mexican people, whatever, we're all struggling. But the focus is so much on like, oh, the grand replacement, be that as it may, what does it matter if it's all about seek first the kingdom of God? Now, it's one thing if you don't believe in the faith and you want to just keep pushing for a racial narrative, and that's people are going to do what they're going to do. But it's very tough to hear that sort of thing, because that's being disingenuous, and you're giving yourself away when you start pushing for we need to build X race community just for us. And it's like, wait a minute, this is what they want. They want more division because it's easier to control people that way.
You're absolutely right. That's the whole point of this. And what am I supposed to say to the Mexicans? We white guys have to stick together? Are Mexicans white? Well, this is ridiculous. You're immediately cutting off one of the most significant groups in the country right now, which is the Mexicans. Are Mexicans Catholic? Well, yeah, they are, until they get to California. And then these Protestant prosperity preachers like Joel Osteen grab a hold of them and say, you want a BMW? God will give you a BMW if you worship in my church. And the Mexicans are being seduced by this American false religion. So no, that's going nowhere. And that is the fundamental problem here. It doesn't work. This thing doesn't work. The biggest shock in this regard is Brother Nathaniel. Why is Brother Nathaniel kind of suddenly on this white guy kick? Do you agree? First of all, you're not a Jew anymore, because the minute you get baptized, you're not a Jew. But do you believe that Jews are white? Well, then you're falling right into the Jared Taylor camp. That's a phony operation. That's a completely phony operation that is one of the many phony operations in this world today, where you're basically creating a false opposition. The whole racial narrative as a nationalist narrative. In England, you got Tommy Robinson, who's got Ezra Levant, who's going to bail him out of jail as long as he says Muslims are the problem and convinces the soccer hooligans in England to attack the Muslims. That's another stupid idea. The whole point, the same thing in Germany. You got these people, we just did a program yesterday about this lady who's now admits that Germany is a shithole country, but then she starts attacking the Muslims. Wait a minute. You should be talking to the Muslims and saying we have a common enemy. This is the political move that we have to make now. I was in Chicago. Jason Whitlock introduced me to his buddy in the Nation of Islam. We met with him. Okay? I gave him a copy. Here's the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. Please give this to Minister Farrakhan. You know, I admire the work of Minister Farrakhan because he exposed his involvement in the slave trade. That was a significant piece of intellectual work. And then the guy says, well, you know, you have a lot of supporters in Islam. We watch your podcast. And then he says to me, if you're ever in trouble, we got your back. This is the way we should be talking. And the main point of this racial ideology is to prevent us from talking to each other. I believe in logos. I believe in talking. I don't believe in guns. And you got a guy, the does not believe in logos. The is in rebellion against logos. The killed the logos incarnate. And when you make him Secretary of State, he doesn't know how to talk. All he knows how to say is, I have relatives that died in the Holocaust, and then he goes over to Kiev and plays a Neil Young song. This guy is a disaster. American foreign policy is a disaster because Biden's minion controls American foreign policy.
It's a sad state of affairs as far as that goes, and we're all you're right, we're so divided, and they want us to keep us in these nice little boxes so we don't talk to each other. But it's like, if we were to just talk to each other, we could just get past the whole race thing and focus on the faith. And maybe maybe if it's people who follow Islam and Catholicism, we may not see eye to eye, but hey, we can agree that genocide is evil. We can do that. And I think...
So what I said to him is, we have a common enemy.
Right.
And that's enough for the political sphere. That's all you need for politics. You know, I'm not going to, I have my religion, you have your religion, this is America, I don't have established religion, except the fact that de facto our established religion right now, but not officially. But I'm saying we can collaborate. And we can collaborate because we have one common problem that needs to be addressed, and that is control of our culture, control of our foreign policy, control of the political process. Benjamin Netanyahu is going to arrive in Washington this month. And Speaker Johnson has said, we are going to have more standing ovations than we had the last time he was here. That was 25 standing ovations. These guys aren't going to be able to sit down. What's it going to be? 55 standing? You won't be able to sit down. This is precisely, they're the ones who are demonstrating this. What more do I need than that? What more do we need than Representative Massey going on Tucker Carlson and saying every congressman has an IPAC minder?
And I have Republicans who come to me and say, that's wrong what AIPAC is doing to you. Let me talk to my AIPAC person. By the way, everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What does that mean, an AIPAC person?
Well, great. Thank you for saying that. Because that is the issue. I don't care whether you're black, brown, yellow, or green. That is the issue if you're an American.
Yep. I saw that interview with Tucker Carlson and Massey, and I there it is. It's there for you to listen to and behold. So you do with that information what you want, dear viewer. Let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about, let's build upon the latest Dr. Jordan Peterson meltdown. Now, I see that he's been attacked, and it almost seems, to me, it still looks like theater, but it seems like he's on this role, and we brought up Nick Fuentes, and he goes on this tirade, and it's vehement, and it's vitriolic, and it's just so, it's nasty, and it's people are starting to see the stark difference of where he was a few years ago, and it helped out guys like me. And then where we are now, ever since he went to the Daily Wire side, it's a whole different thing. And you're familiar with his work and everything. And I still think it would be one of the best things for the internet if you were ever to sit down with Dr. Jordan Peterson and have Tucker Carlson host it. But what are your thoughts with the latest debacle, this falling from a sort of level, and here we are with Jordan Peterson now?
Yeah. Well, Candace Owen did a good video on this thing, like what happened to Jordan Peterson. The beginning, first of all, there was not a lot of depth here to begin with. Okay, it's good to clean up your room. That's what is it, 10 Rules for Life or 12, whatever it was. Sold 10 million copies. Okay, so he became a phenom because he stood up to political correctness in Canada. Well, okay, that's a little bit now. Okay, great. You're not going to use 27 different pronouns. That's good. I'm glad you did that. But that's not really a big, deep issue. So then he became anointed by David Brooks wrote an article in the New York Times, said the Jordan Peterson moment. And once that happened, Jordan Peterson knew which side his bread was buttered on. It was. So he would never. So one guy, a famous moment, asked him, "Have you read 200 Years Together?" I was like, "Oh, I can't answer the question."
I can't do it. That's okay.
Well, wait a minute. Why can't you answer that question? I'm not going to throw you in jail because you're reading Solzhenitsyn. He won the Nobel Prize. Couldn't do it because 200 Years is about the Jews in Russia, and that's the taboo topic. So he goes along this way. He's clearly, he's not being honest. Okay, he's got a drug addiction that may have affected his ability to think. Somebody asked him about, do you believe in God?
What do you mean, do?
What do you mean? Do you mean God?
What do you mean, you?
What do you mean by God? What do you mean by the? What do you mean by...
Yeah.
What do you mean, believe?
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, right.
The existence of God is an article of reason. You don't need faith to understand that there's a God. Every single human being from the beginning had a notion of God. Not only a notion of God, but that God was a father and he lived in the sky. Deus Pater. Deus Pater is the Indo-European word. It becomes Zeus Pater in Greek. It becomes Jupiter in Rome, in Latin. It's part of what it means to be a human being. It's part of being logos, a part of speech, and so on and so forth. And he can't figure that out. And he's supposed to be a guide for the rest of us. And so finally Now, I don't know the chronology here exactly, but there was this moment, the picture, Ben Shapiro posts the picture of him leaning over the table, shaking hands with Benjamin Netanyahu. And suddenly, okay, the cat's out of the bag. Yeah. Then he goes to Daily Wire, which is a operation. He signs on board at the very moment that Candace Owens get kicked off, right around the same time, because Candace Owens said Christ is king, and that's anti-Semitic now. He goes along with that, but the real turning point, I think, was when the war in Gaza broke out, and he tweets, "Give him hell," to Netanyahu. So basically, he's now on board with genocide. This is genocide, Jordan. This isn't pronouns. This is serious stuff here, and you sided with the enemies of the entire human race. Well, now, and apparently, according to Candace, he had a lot of Muslim followers, and they all walked out of the room at that point.
Wow. And
rightly so, because this was the fundamental test of our age. I mean, did you stand with the people of Logos, or did you stand with the enemies of the entire human race? He sided with the enemies of the entire human race, and he thought, hey, I don't need you people because I got big bucks from Daily Wire. Well, it's not working out well. And then the latest outburst, out of the blue, he starts calling Nick Fuentes a rat. Now, I just talked about my disagreement with Nick Fuentes. I'm not going to call him a rat because he didn't invite me to his thing, so we can have a discussion here about where I'm trying to help you here. But to just out of the blue call him a rat? I mean, are you back on benzos? This is like a tweet in the middle of the night. You shouldn't do this type of thing. And then he doubles down on it.
Right.
Makes the situation where they drags his daughter into it. Oh no, it's getting worse and worse and worse here.
It really is.
And so what's the fundamental issue here? You can have all the money in the world, and it's not going to amount to anything compared to the truth. Because the truth is great and it will prevail. And if you tell the truth, you are going to be part of God's plan for human history. And if you're not part of God's plan for human history, the train is going to leave the station without you. And I hate to say this, but Jordan, I think the train left the station. And you have a lot of money, you got all those fancy, weird suits.
So it's quite fun. So
Which one's hell?
I'll show you in a sec. So this is, hell's red, Joe. Come on.
Right.
But you didn't tell the truth at the crucial moment. The crucial moment came many times along the way, but certainly with Gaza. And you sided with the enemies of the entire human race, and everybody knows it now.
Dr. Jones, I want to connect that because with this Culture Wars article, as Jordan Peterson goes down this path, I think a lot of and I don't read Derrida.
Nobody understands Derrida. I don't even think Derrida understands Derrida.
Here's the thing. I brought him up because in your article from this June issue of Culture Wars, and it's titled, I'll get this right here, Glazer's Choice Logos Ought Nihil. We get a little bit of insight from Derrida because I don't read Derrida or anything like that, but it seems like with Jordan Peterson and the connection with going down this path of Derrida, because when you get asked a question, do you believe in God, right? And Jordan Peterson is focusing on the sentence structure and each individual word as opposed to the actual question. And he comes up with these intelligent explanations for the actual question, but never actually answering the question, right? And it reminds me of that level of incoherence and inconsistency and word salad that is identical with Derrida. And I love this quote you brought up. As Augustine once said, quote, even those who set themselves up against you, end quote, referring to God, quote, do but copy you in a perverse way, end quote.
Yeah, this is absolutely true of metaphysics. Okay? Heidegger figured it out. Derrida is in some sense a disciple of Heidegger. He's Jewish. Okay, he's channeling, comes from a family of rabbis. They have been in rebellion against Logos ever since they crucified Christ. Okay, the Talmud is rebellion against Logos, and now Derrida is going to take it to its ultimate conclusion, which is basically a metaphysical attack on being. You can't, there is no metaphysical statement that you can make that will not substantiate the very opposite of what you're trying to say, which is exactly the point of this Augustine thing. And he said it. There is no metaphysical statement that is outside of metaphysics. You're absolutely right. And so it's self-defeating. It's a self-defeating process from the beginning. Do you have that
Yes,
quote from him?
Yes, I do.
Because I quote him. So let's get to you don't have to read Of Grammatology. I'll spare you that. That's why God put me on this earth, to spare you from reading Of Grammatology.
Derrida, here's where you start off.
Okay. Derrida's subverted language's foundation in the Logos, while simultaneously making language the uncaused cause of all text. Language at this point becomes known as the surrogate, which what he means is the surrogate for metaphysics. Okay? Surrogate for God. In other words, language creates thought. That's what he's saying. And then he goes on to explain the surrogate. The surrogate does not substitute itself for anything which has somehow pre-existed it. From then on, it was probably necessary to begin to think that there was no center. He's attacking what he calls logocentrism, which is God. Okay, that's an attack on God. No center. That the center could not be thought of in the form of being present. So he's attacking being now, presence. That the center had no natural locus. That it was not a fixed locus, but a function. A sort of non-locus in which an infinite number of sign substitutions came into play. This moment was that in which language invaded the universal problematic, that in which the absence of center or origin, everything became discourse. Okay? Language is God. And you think that there's a God because language tells you to think that way, but there's nothing there. There's no center. Well, wait a minute. He's saying there's a moment, the center, the absence of center, when everything became discourse. What he's talking about is the real presence. What is the real presence? It's Christ present in the Eucharist. When did that happen? That happened on Good Friday. What happened after that? Jesus Christ was crucified by the Jews. What happened after that? The temple was destroyed. That's the moment we're talking about here. That's when everything became discourse. What's he talking about? The Talmud. The Torah is the Word of God. After the temple was destroyed, everything became discourse. That's the Talmud. It's an unending debate between agree on anything. It's a complete waste of time. And this is the culmination of that. Provide discourse, providing that we can agree on this word. That is to say, when everything became a system where the central signified, the original or transcendental signified, is never absolutely present outside a system of differences. That's the Talmud. There is no real presence of Judaism anymore. The Shekinah was destroyed at the time of the crucifixion, and now it's nothing but discourse, and Derrida, the Jew, is now trying to make this into some type of metaphysical principle. The absence of the transcendental signified, the transcendental signifier is God, extends the domain and the interplay of signification ad infinitum. It's nothing but discourse. That's the Talmud. It's nothing but because there's no real presence, and there's no real presence because the said so, ignoring the real presence of the Eucharist. That's Derrida. Thank you. You're welcome for sparing everyone from having to read Jacques Derrida.
You know, I read Derrida. I don't know who came first or what, but I mean, it's like all that's missing in this sort of trajectory is. And by the way, just do what thou wilt. Do whatever you want, and be your own God.
And right, and you will control you by manipulating your appetite, and that's why we have a rabbi who's the head of Pornhub.
I'm familiar with that story. Doc, we brought up Derrida. Let's switch gears to back to the literary world. I hear you talk and write about C.S. Lewis and great authors, and I've picked up so many good books because of your information. What are your thoughts on Dostoevsky? Tell me about that.
Dostoevsky was a revolutionary at the time before Bolshevism, when Narodnaya Volia had basically taken over the revolutionary movement, the national path, in Russian universities. He was part of that movement. He got arrested and he got sent to Siberia as punishment. And there he had a conversion, and he converted back to the Orthodox faith. And that's when he started writing novels like The Idiot. Let's test these premises. Let's test the premises, the revolutionary premises. Let's suppose that it's just will, and you can do whatever you want, and there's no moral order. Exactly what Derrida is talking about. There's no logos here. It's just pure will. You know, Nietzsche was later, but around the same time. But I mean, this is the idea. The cutting edge is already in Russia. So I'm going to prove it to myself, and I'm going to murder this woman who's completely insignificant, and that's called crime and punishment. Do you think you can do that without your conscience being affected? And if your conscience is affected, there must be a God. This is the thing that Dostoevsky is bringing to the Russian mind at a crucial moment. Dostoevsky hated Catholicism. Dostoevsky understood the slave trade in America. Dostoevsky was a compulsive gambler. I was in Dostoevsky's apartment in St. Petersburg. He married his stenographer, so he got these big novels. He dictates them. He stays up all night dictating, and his wife just writes them down. And then he goes to sleep, and his poor wife has to, get them into readable Russian. So he is what he is, and he's one of the first people that was willing to, let's take these premises, like the premises of the Jewish revolutionaries that he was familiar with at the university. Let's take them to their logical conclusion and see where that goes. Well, you do that, it'll take you back to God.
That's right. And it goes back to the idea of guilt, and it goes back to the Scarlet Letter and how heavy it is. And everybody does so many things and to avoid guilt. Let's do more. And it reminds me of a recent talk you did where you have to keep doing something even worse than the offending of behavior in the first place to just keep the guilt away, right. Or you preoccupy yourself with all kinds of vices, or even worse, all kinds of other things.
That's the Marquis de Sade. I got that from the Marquis de Sade. If you feel guilty, first of all, Marquis de Sade said what you call love is basically fluid dynamics. So I think he's talking about the physiology of the ejaculation. Okay, that's fluid. You think it's love. It's just fluid. It's just, it's like the waterworks. Okay. Something like that. Now this is he's taking De la Mettrie's book, Man, a Machine, to its logical conclusion. This is a man who's the opposite, the antithesis of Dostoevsky. He's raised in Catholic France, and now he's going to completely imbibe the materialism of the Enlightenment, De la Mettrie. And so he says, woman is a machine for voluptuousness. We're all machines. And so because we're all machines, we're basically a function of our sexual drives. We can't really do anything about that because that's nature. And, well, wait a minute, why do you feel guilt then? This is the big question. You're right, it's the question of the Scarlet Letter. Why do you feel guilt? You're a saint, right? You're saved. You're predestined to go to heaven because you have to be the elect to be part of the congregation, much less the minister. So why do you feel guilt? Why is Marquis de Sade talking about guilt if it's all just fluid mechanics? Because he's still a human being. He still realizes that this is part of what your soul tells you. Because there is an immutable moral law out there that is part of your being because you are based on logos. Logos is practical, or morality is practical reason.
I love it. Dr. Jones, we talk about the Scarlet Letter and we talk about culture wars. There's one thing I want to point out, and that's these letters. So folks can actually write to culture wars, and they submit kinds of letters about like their stories and kind of what they're kind of going through, or discuss whatever EMJ brings up. And one of them I wanted to bring up, connect this fellow wrote in the June issue, The Judge and My Wife, and he writes, quote, much to their chagrin, my almost 5-year-old daughter firmly believes the truth and has confronted her 64-year-old grandparents many times, parentheses, my wife lives with them and they work to alienate us, end parentheses. He further writes, she knows the truth about marriage and family in age-appropriate ways and works relentlessly to reconcile her parents, such as asking her mother to speak with me, to join video calls, and telling her directly she wants our family to be together. So I point this out because when I read that, Dr. Jones, I think about the prescience of children, right? And having siblings and seeing that, and I've seen it. And I call it this sort of prescience combined with innocence, and it's so beautiful to behold, right? It's part of the beauty of children, right?
Yeah.
And this I wanted to bring up because this 5-year-old daughter reminded me of the character Pearl in the Scarlet Letter.
That's right. That's exactly right. So the crucial scene is the forest scene, which I've already mentioned. So Hester and Dimmesdale come together in the forest. Now, as I told you, this is the quintessential American experience. You come to the forest, there's no custom, there's no law here, it's just the forest. Some people, the Puritans, think it's the realm of the devil, so that gives it a little different. And so Pearl enters in. I've already told you about Hester. Hester says, let's just head west. We don't have to put up with that stuff, let's just head west. And then he tries to kiss Pearl. And Pearl is appalled in her innocent way, and she rushes off into the stream and washes the kiss off. And the kiss is a crucial element of this thing, because you can't impose the kiss on somebody who doesn't want to be kissed. It has to be mutually agreed upon. And Pearl obviously understood that there's a kind of hypocrisy here, where you talk to my mother in the woods where nobody can see you, but when it comes to you in the town, you pretend you don't know her, even though you're my father and you're the partner in crime. Right. So she understands that completely. She says it, and at that point, the whole project of let's head west, it all collapses. And at that point, Dimmesdale realized, I got to stand with her on the scaffold. The way I did at the beginning. This is one of the great. It's probably the greatest novel, American novel.
It's so good.
Ever written, because it all flows from that fundamental premise that is established at the beginning, which is Hester, Dimmesdale, and the judge standing on the scaffold where she has to accept the guilt for adultery. Well, wait a minute. It takes two to tangle here, doesn't it? There's obviously a child involved. Well, who's the father? And Dimmesdale, everything evolves out of that. How is Dimmesdale going to deal with this thing? And this is where they preclude. This is why Hawthorne is a man of the East, because he understands the delusion of the West, which is basically you can just go off into the woods and a morning in spring will absolve your sins. That's what Thoreau said. No, it's not going to happen. That's the genius of this whole interaction about the American experience.
I love it, Dr. Jones. So we're talking about things that have to do with mother, father, or kids, and a mother. And I want to bring up this idea of, I see a lot of people around my age and think they get a lot of distressed by the state of dating and a reluctance to even engage. Maybe they'll just get a dog or a cat instead. And because I don't think you can do it without the faith. I don't think you can do it. And I think you can get away with a lot of things. You know, just recently I had a friend that I know through my girlfriend where a couple had been going out for like 3 years or something like that. They're agnostic. They don't believe anything or whatever. They kind of know something's there, but they're too busy worshiping the California nature, right? As opposed to acknowledging a God. So they're both secular. And the man, or the guy in the relationship, he proposes to the girl. But here's the thing. He never met her family out in California. So it's just like, wait a minute. You're proposing to this woman. You haven't even met her family, but you're proposing marriage? So once again, we have the geist of like, okay, we have this idea of marriage. There's some sort of sanctity, but it's disregarded. And so it becomes like this legal contract. And then they come up, she said no, by the way. And she probably said no because it didn't seem right.
No,
and there was
right.
something to it. So they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want the marriage, but then they don't want the things that have to do that makes a marriage successful.
So you're talking about a fundamental issue here. Brownson came to the conclusion that the only way you can demand fidelity in marriage is if you have a sacramental marriage in the Catholic Church. He said, because human passion is simply too strong, and you can't arrange this on your own. You can't just sort of live together and expect there's going to be a happy outcome. There is not going to be a happy outcome, because what's happening here is you're both growing, you're both becoming more and more egotistical, even though the fact that you're living together, at a certain point, there is no communion. It's not a marriage. You're committing the sin of fornication or adultery or whatever sin. That makes you more and more selfish. And at a certain point, you get so selfish, you can't stand being with the other person, and you break up. That's the dynamic. Orestes Brownson said that you can only demand fidelity till death do us part if you have a sacramental marriage with the Catholic Church. Now, that he said it, I understand what he's saying. I agree with what he's saying. And the move, as long as if you start moving away from that, you're going to have this epidemic of divorce, which is what we have now. Because it's very similar to what you said about, forgiveness of sin. I don't need the church. I can just go into my closet and absolve myself from sin. No, it doesn't work that way. I don't need marriage. I can just live together with my girlfriend, and we don't need all this type of stuff. No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And if you think you're going to do it, okay, you're going to wreck your life. Because this is a crucial moment in your life where you have to make the right decision. And you have to confirm it in a public way and also in a spiritual way by getting married in the Catholic Church. If you're not a Catholic, you better become a Catholic. This is the whole message that I'm learning here from just doing this American experience thing. Americans thought, I can do it on my own. I can go off into the woods. Well, it didn't work. It still hasn't worked. And it's not going to work. So if you're getting down to the brass tacks here, the main enemy of marriage at this moment is the cell phone. Because it is a form of control. And the main form of control on the cell phone is. And so the problem is, if you want to find a wife, I'm talking about the guys now, you're going to have to break the pornography habit, because it turns you into a very unattractive person. And we have a phenomenon now in Japan called hikikomori.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay, I think we call them incels over here, or whatever it is. But it's basically, I think it seems to me that Japan is the pornography capital of the world. They have more addicts there. And when you become a pornography addict, it isolates you. And now they got these people just living in their rooms and never come out of their rooms.
Je pense aussi de se sentir coupé du monde, et en même temps il se coupait aussi du monde.
I think this is where Jordan Peterson came in. Except that he wasn't deep enough to say, why are you in your room? Why is your room a mess? Because your mind is a mess. Why is your mind a mess? Because you're watching pornography. You have completely isolated yourself from the rest of the world, which means from the woman that you need to meet to have a successful life. The women's operation is a little bit different, okay? The attraction is not so much to pornography, but there is this spirit of rebellion, which they inherited from Eve. And it's been institutionalized in the legal system, especially family court. And so in family court, thanks to our friends, who I know the story, a chapter and verse of what happened here in Indiana, where the lady, Sam Shapiro's wife, basically used some type of murder as a way of completely taking over the justice system. So now the woman is always right. And the women know this now, and they can blow up their own marriage and feel victims at the same time. And the state will hold their hands, and you got all this type of stuff. I think that's the main problem with women.
I agree, and I think it would behoove the man who is searching for a woman. And I read some of these horror stories of the divorces, and I think to myself, where did you find this woman? Did you find this woman at a bar, at a club? So part of the issue is I think a lot of men fall folly where it's just like, okay, well, especially if you don't have faith, I think you're setting yourself up for a disaster there. But you do what you want. But I think it's folly if a man has faith and then searches for a woman, and then the woman doesn't have faith or is on the fence. And then at what point in the relationship are you going to address that? It's an uphill battle.
Everybody's the walking wounded right now, and I'm no exception. So I met my wife on the beach in Wildwood, New Jersey. Is that I don't know. Well, it is what it is. What am I going to say? It's the world that we live in. Everybody went when I was 18 years old I was 17 years old at that point. Everybody in Philadelphia went to the beach on Wildwood, New Jersey. It was like boomers from far as the eye could see. Well, that's nature. Okay, now grace can perfect nature, and it's exactly what it did in my life, because at that point, I was I didn't even know it. Because I had become part of the art world in Philadelphia, which was run by the Catholic Church was giving me confusing signals in like 2 years after the end of the Vatican Council. And I just started, it seemed like the rational thing to do. But God didn't lead me in that position. I mean, we came together. There was a purpose in that, and it was basically the marriage. We got married in the Catholic Church, which is unusual given my circumstances, because I was friends. Actually, the priest who invited me to introduced me to the Jewish art world is also the priest that married us. So there was that residual kind of Catholic connection, and I think it made a difference, because when the storms of life come, you need some type of solid foundation, and that's what we had with this Catholic marriage. And so eventually, I got the job in Germany, and when I got there, I stopped being I came back to the Catholic faith because that was a Catholic culture. So you can't minimize the effect of culture. And there's nothing wrong with meeting your future wife in a bar. I don't know. I mean, bars are what they are. I mean, I don't like bars. I like pubs in places like Germany. The Kneipe is a much more friendlier environment than a bar. I don't particularly like bars. But it is what it is. My father met my mother in a bar in Sea Isle, New Jersey. I mean, but this is a place where you went to meet members of the opposite sex. You went to the Jersey Shore.
What I mean by that, Dr. Jones, is like, I know that there's people who genuinely use a community spot at a bar for an afternoon beer or whatever, and they happen to find a woman or whatever. But I'm talking about like the 2 a.m. bars.
Okay, now we're talking about the word bar. What does that mean? Does bar in 1947 mean the same thing as bar in 2000? Now, this is what we have. Obviously, it's an ambiguous statement. There's no such thing. If you say bar in Germany, the word bar means prostitution. If that's what the word bar, if it says some type of bar, you know there are going to be prostitutes there. If you want to go to the local pub, it's called a Kneipe, and they serve food there, and there are no prostitutes there. So we're talking about, I think the Germans understood, that took the word bar and turned it into a code word for whorehouse. That's what it means. So there's an ambivalence to the term that we have to sort out. And that's part of what you have to learn too.
Awesome. I love it. Doc, we'll wrap it up here. We talk about these politics, and we talk about racial division, we talk about the faith, we talk about modern man, the postmodern man, this brave new world. Dr. Jones, when is it time to finally reject the whole system? Reject red versus blue and getting involved in that mess. We all know it's crooked. We all know it's corrupt. When is the time do we finally say, this is happening, but I am not of this system? America is not this grandiose, this sort of nostalgic place anymore. It's become this sort of system, this machine that funds death.
Right.
And so at what point do we just say, okay, let that be. I'm going to focus my life on God and do the best I can despite the chaos?
No, they're not mutually exclusive. You're supposed to be in the world, but not of it, which means you don't abandon the world. The world is what it is. That's existence, okay? We have the phenomenon of moving to Idaho. I don't want to offend anybody in Idaho, but it has a particular meaning, okay, as opposed to Philadelphia, which has a particular meaning. These are the two poles, the west-east poles that I've already talked about. So Christ said that you don't extinguish the smoldering wick. In other words, you're always going to find a problematic situation. And that's the situation you have to deal with, and don't abandon it. So last night, someone said, isn't every country in Europe a shithole country? Well, no. If you've ever been there, you know there is a significant patrimony of Christianity that still exists, in spite of the crazy regime that's in charge of Germany at this point. I've told you, the classic example was Croatia. You know, that's a Christian culture that's been there for a long time, and it's still there. And we were protected by that ethnic culture. So you don't want to turn your back on it. You don't want to turn your back on Bavaria. There's still a beautiful culture there in Bavaria, the German high culture that revolves around music and some sort of philosophy. You don't want to abandon that. You're part of, you don't want to become part of it. So what's America? Is it a country or is it an ideology? Well, it's both. And you have to be able to make the distinction. And if you can't, you're looking for trouble. So the new Galanter at Yale says America is the world's fourth great religion. Well, I think you're right, but that's not me. That's not my religion. But I'm living here. In other words, existence always takes priority over essence. The existence here, I have my own experience. We as Catholics have our own experience in America, which I'm trying to articulate in this book. And it's been, some sense, always going to be resistance to the American ideology, which is the world's fourth great religion. We have to be able to distinguish between, I'll give you a classic example of the inability to make that distinction. It's Notre Dame University, which is dedicated to promoting America as the world's fourth great religion and being dishonest about it by giving the aura of Catholicism as if there's no contradiction between these two things.
You hate to see that. And it becomes, if you don't know, you don't know. But as soon as you become exposed to it, hopefully that person has a level of consciousness to connect, to see that there's this gross hypocrisy there. And that's kind of...
Yeah, I'm saying, look, I have certain rights as an American. And one of my rights is freedom of religion. And I'm not going to let the Jews impose their religion on me. It happened to me once, and I'm not going to let it happen again. And so you can say abortion is a fundamental Jewish value, and I'm glad you said it, because what happened with abortion, with Roe versus Wade in 1973, is impose their religion on the entire people of the United States of America. And now we're not going to let that happen again. Now we have the consciousness. Now we can identify the enemy. And no, we're not going to support Israel anymore. We're not going to support Israel using American troops to fight their battles for them in Lebanon. We're not going to die for who's in charge of the Ukraine. No, we're not going to do that anymore. And I have a right as an American to say, no, I'm not going to take part in that. And you can do whatever you want, and you can ban me or shadow ban me or others, but I'm not going to go along with the Jewish project anymore, because I have a religion and it's not Judaism. I guarantee you that. And you don't have an identity unless you have a religion. And the only two options are Protestant Catholic, and Protestant is a busted flush. And so now it's the Catholic moment, because we need the Catholics to stand up to the in the same way that the Catholic Church stood up to the Hollywood Jews in the 1930s. There's precedent for this.
I love it, Dr. Jones. And with my final word, I'm going to build off of that and just comment and say, this is it. This is it. You want to pick a side? It's religion. It's and that's kind of what I've seen it as, and I think it would behoove you to come back to the faith or re-explore it. I think a lot of people get caught up on like, oh, well, it's just like this Jew religion. It's not. It's not like that. I plead you to come back to the faith, and I think it's going to help your life out. But you do what you want. Those are my final words.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Jones, and thank you, Mike, for handling the audio and video. And I look forward to our next discussion, Dr. Jones.
Good. And send us the link, and we'll promote the good discussion. Okay. Good discussion.
Okay, that's perfect. I will.
All right.